The SS Resolute groaned like an ancient beast as it glided through the void of space. Its metal hull, pockmarked with dents and scars from centuries of service, reflected dim starlight. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than an oversized hunk of scrap metal limping through the cosmos. But to Captain Nathan Hale, it was a marvel of human endurance and ingenuity. Hale sat in the captain's chair, leaning forward with a quiet intensity as he scanned the readouts on the bridge. Around him, his crew worked efficiently, despite the creaks and occasional shudders that ran through the ship. They were used to it. The Resolute had been patched, upgraded, and reassembled so many times that it barely resembled its original design, but it was still theirs. "Any sign of them yet?" Hale asked, his voice calm but firm. Lieutenant Vaughan, his navigator, glanced at the sensors. "Nothing yet, sir, but they're out there. The Velix scouts have been shadowing us for hours." Hale grunted. He could feel the weight of the Velix Imperium pressing down on them, even without seeing their ships. The Velix were known throughout the galaxy for their arrogance and technological superiority. Their fleet was among the most feared in known space, and they had no respect for Earth or its aging relics. The Resolute had been dispatched to this region of space as a deterrent, a symbol of Earth's presence in the wider galactic stage. But Hale knew better. In truth, they were bait. Earth's Defense Council wanted to see what the Velix would do, how far they would go, and if a confrontation was inevitable. "They're probably laughing at us," said Chief Engineer Malcolm Jones from his station, wiping grease from his hands. "I bet they think this old girl is a joke. Rust bucket, my ass." "They wouldn't be wrong, Jones," Hale replied dryly. "But that's the point, isn't it?" Jones grinned. "You think they're gonna underestimate us?" Hale didn't answer, but the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth spoke volumes. The Resolute was more than just a relic from Earth's early spacefaring days. Beneath the beaten exterior, it housed a fusion of experimental tech that even the Velix hadn't encountered before. Humanity had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. "Captain," Vaughan said suddenly, "we're picking up a signal. Velix signatures, closing in fast." Hale leaned forward. "How many?" "4 destroyers. Looks like they're forming an attack pattern." "Of course they are." Hale straightened in his seat. "Comms, open a channel to the Velix." Lieutenant Carter tapped a few keys, and a thin hum of static filled the bridge. After a few moments, a haughty, guttural voice came through. "This is Commander Threx of the Velix Imperium. Human vessel, you are in violation of Velix-controlled space. Surrender your ship and prepare to be boarded or be destroyed." Hale chuckled softly. "Commander Threx, this is Captain Nathan Hale of the SS Resolute. I'll save you the trouble of scanning us. We're an old ship, you can see that, but we're not interested in surrendering today." There was a pause, then Threx's voice came back, dripping with disdain. "Your ship is an insult to the stars, human. A relic of a backward race. We will take it apart, piece by piece, and show the galaxy what happens when inferior species refuse to know their place." Hale exchanged a glance with Jones, who rolled his eyes. "Right? We've heard that before. You should be careful about underestimating relics, Commander." "Last chance," Threx growled. "Surrender or die." Hale's smile vanished. "We'll see who dies." He cut the channel and turned to his crew. "Battle stations, all hands." The bridge lit up with red alerts, and the crew moved with practiced precision. Despite the age of the ship, they were ready for this. They had to be. The Resolute lurched as its aging engines roared to life, and the ship shifted course to face the incoming Velix destroyers. On the tactical screen, the alien ships moved like sleek predators, their smooth black hulls glinting menacingly. Hale knew what those ships could do. Velix technology was generations ahead of Earth's, their weapon systems unmatched in sheer firepower. But that didn't worry him. "Bring up the Mark Roman 7 shields," he ordered. Jones raised an eyebrow. "You sure? We've never tested those under fire." "Now's a good time to find out," Hale replied coolly. The Mark Roman 7 shields were part of the Resolute's secret arsenal. Reverse-engineered from alien technology, they were untested, unstable, and completely off the books. Officially, the Resolute was an outdated rust bucket. Unofficially, it was Earth's test bed for cutting-edge systems that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. "Shields online," Varin confirmed. "We're ready." "Good. Let's make them sweat." Hale leaned back in his chair as the first volley of plasma bolts streaked toward them. The Velex destroyers had opened fire without hesitation, fully expecting to blast the human ship into oblivion. But as the plasma rounds hit, the Mark Roman 7 shields flared to life. Instead of absorbing the impact like traditional shields, the energy was redirected, swirling around the ship in arcs of brilliant blue light. The plasma bolts dissipated harmlessly, leaving the Resolute unscathed. "They're probably confused right about now," Jones muttered. "They're about to be a lot more than confused," Hale said. "Target the lead destroyer and bring the plasma lances online." Plasma lances were another hidden ace up the Resolute's sleeve, energy weapons capable of punching through even the toughest shields. Earth had acquired the technology through a series of covert operations, and the Resolute was the first ship to be outfitted with them. Varin locked onto the Velex destroyer. "Target acquired. Fire." The Resolute shuddered as the plasma lances fired in quick succession. 3 bolts of concentrated energy shot through the darkness, and Hale watched the tactical screen as the first one hit the lead Velex ship dead center. Its shields held for a split second before collapsing in a flash of light. The second and third lances followed, tearing through the destroyer's hull. In moments, the once feared Velex ship was nothing more than a cloud of debris. A stunned silence filled the bridge. Jones whistled. "That was beautiful." "One down," Hale said, eyes fixed on the remaining ships. "Let's see if they still think we're just a rust bucket." The Velex destroyers hesitated, clearly taken aback by the sudden destruction of their lead ship. But after a brief moment, they regrouped and resumed their attack, this time with more caution. "They're learning," Varin noted. "Not fast enough," Hale said grimly. "Ready the EMP missiles." The Velex destroyers began weaving evasively, clearly unsettled by the quick destruction of their lead ship. But Hale knew they weren't about to retreat. Velex didn't back down. Their pride wouldn't let them. "EMP missiles are armed," Jones confirmed from the weapons console, his fingers flying over the controls. Hale kept his eyes on the tactical screen. The 3 remaining destroyers were closing in, spreading out in a formation designed to overwhelm their defenses from multiple angles. It was a standard Velex tactic, used to crush enemies through sheer coordination and superior firepower. "Lieutenant Varin," Hale called, "bring us around. Keep them guessing." "Aye, Captain." The Resolute banked sharply, its old hull groaning under the strain, but it held together. The ship was built to withstand more than its fair share of punishment, and while it wasn't pretty, it was far from fragile. As the Resolute shifted position, the Velex ships fired another barrage of plasma rounds. This time, they were coordinated, coming in from different directions. The Mark Roman 7 shields flared again, dispersing most of the energy, but some of the bolts got through, rattling the ship. "Minor hull breaches on decks 4 and 6, Varin reported, his voice calm despite the situation. "Jones, let's give them a little surprise," Hale said. "Fire the EMP missiles." Jones grinned and tapped the controls. Missiles away. The Resolute launched 2 EMP missiles, their sleek forms streaking through the blackness of space. The Velex destroyers saw them coming and immediately scrambled to intercept. Energy blasts from the alien ships struck one of the missiles, detonating it in a harmless flash. But the second missile veered sharply, bypassing their defenses and detonating in the midst of their formation. A pulse of electromagnetic energy rippled out, and the Velex ships flickered as their systems short-circuited. For a few precious seconds, they were dead in the water. "Now," Hale said, "fire the lances. All of them." The Resolute unleashed a full barrage of plasma lances, targeting the disabled destroyers. Without their shields, the Velix ships were helpless. The first destroyer exploded in a fireball of metal and energy, its hull torn apart by the plasma lances. The second fared no better, splitting in half as the energy beams sliced through it like a knife through butter. Only one ship remained. The Velix flagship, larger and more heavily armored than the destroyers, had been far enough from the EMP blast to escape total disablement. It still had some maneuverability and enough firepower to be a serious threat. "Flagship's turning toward us," Varen said, his eyes on the tactical readouts. "Looks like they're not running after all." "Of course not," Hale muttered. "They'd rather die than retreat." "Good thing we're happy to oblige," Jones said, reloading the plasma lances. Hale studied the screen. The Velix flagship had slowed, no doubt recalibrating its systems after the EMP, but it was still operational, and judging by the energy buildup on its sensors, it was preparing for a massive counterattack. "They're charging up something big," Hale said. "Jones, how long until the lances are ready again?" 40 seconds, give or take." "Not fast enough," Hale muttered. "Lieutenant Varen, bring us in close." Varen's head snapped up. "Sir?" "You heard me," Hale said, his voice calm but firm. "Close the distance. We're going in." Varen hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Aye, Captain." The Resolute surged forward, engines roaring as it accelerated toward the Velix flagship. Hale could feel the tension in the air, the quiet apprehension of his crew. They all knew what this move meant. Getting closer to the flagship meant getting within range of its heaviest weapons, but it was also the best way to take advantage of the Resolute's unique arsenal. "Captain," Carter, the comms officer, said, "we're receiving another transmission from the Velix flagship. Commander Threx again." "Put him through," Hale said. Threx's voice came through the speakers, cold and furious. "You are a fool, human. You cannot defeat the Imperium. Your ship is nothing but a pile of scrap, and we will reduce it to dust. Surrender now, and perhaps we will let some of your crew live to see their homeworld one last time." Hale's jaw tightened. "That's a generous offer, Commander, but I think we'll pass. Besides, you're about to find out that this pile of scrap isn't done with you yet." "You are all going to die," Threx snarled. Hale cut the transmission and turned back to his crew. "Let's make sure that's not the case. Jones, status on those lances." 15 seconds, Captain." "That'll have to be enough." Hale leaned forward in his seat. "Varen, bring us in tight, right up on their flank." The Resolute continued its headlong rush toward the Velix flagship. The alien ship's weapons began to power up, glowing with a menacing red light as it prepared to unleash its counterattack. "Incoming," Varen shouted. A massive energy blast erupted from the Velix flagship, heading straight for the Resolute. Hale gripped the armrests of his chair as the ship's shields flared in response. The Mark Roman 7 shields absorbed part of the blast, but the energy was too much. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as several consoles sparked. "Shields at critical," Jones yelled. "We can't take another hit like that." "We won't need to," Hale said. "Varen, evasive maneuvers. Bring us under their main guns." The Resolute dipped low, swinging beneath the Velix flagship's main cannons, which struggled to adjust to the human ship's sudden movements. The Resolute was old, but it was nimble in ways the Velix couldn't predict. The aliens had designed their ships for brute strength, not agility. "Plasma lances are charged and ready," Jones shouted. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Fire." The Resolute's plasma lances blazed to life, firing in quick succession. This time, they were aimed directly at the flagship's engines. The energy blast tore through the Velix's rear shields and hit their target. The flagship shuddered, its engines flickering and dying as fire and debris spewed from its aft section. "They're disabled," Varen said, his voice full of disbelief. "We've got them, sir." But Hale didn't relax. Something didn't feel right. The Velix were ruthless, yes, but they weren't suicidal. Why weren't they retreating? "Keep an eye on their weapon systems," Hale ordered. They might have something else up their sleeve. Captain, Carter said, her voice tense. We're picking up a massive energy spike from the flagship. I think they're overloading their reactor. Hale's eyes widened. They're going to self-destruct. The Velex had no intention of retreating. They were planning to take the Resolute down with them. Varin, get us out of here, Hale barked. Full reverse, now. The Resolute's engines roared as it tried to pull away, but the Velex flagship was already glowing with an ominous red light, its reactor on the verge of overload. Brace for impact, Hale shouted. The Resolute surged backward as fast as its engines would allow, but the Velex flagship was too close, and its reactor was seconds away from exploding. Hale's hands tightened on the armrest of his command chair, every muscle in his body braced for the inevitable. All hands, brace for impact, he shouted over the ship-wide comms, his voice cutting through the rising tension on the bridge. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the Velex flagship as its reactor finally overloaded, consuming the ship in a fiery explosion. The shockwave hit the Resolute like a hammer, slamming into its weakened shields. The ship shuddered violently, metal groaning under the stress. Consoles sparked, and several crew members were thrown from their seats as alarms blared throughout the bridge. Shields down to 10%, Varin shouted over the chaos. Structural integrity failing on decks 4 and 6. Hale gritted his teeth, his mind racing. The Resolute was barely holding together. If they took any more hits, the ship wouldn't survive. But then, as the light from the explosion began to fade, the tactical screen cleared. The Velex flagship was gone. Hale exhaled slowly, tension still coiled in his chest. They'd survived. Damage report, he ordered, trying to steady his voice. Multiple hull breaches, Jones said, running through the ship's diagnostics. Main power is fluctuating, but we're still operational. Barely. Casualties? Hale asked. None reported so far, sir, Varin said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Looks like we got lucky. Hale nodded, letting that sink in for a moment. They had been lucky too lucky. His gut told him that this wasn't the end. The Velex didn't send 3 destroyers and a flagship just to die in some random skirmish. Captain, Carter said from the communications console, her voice cutting through the silence. We're picking up a long-range transmission. It's faint, but it's on an encrypted Velex frequency. Hale's eyes narrowed. Put it through. Carter tapped a few keys, and the message crackled through the speakers. The voice was low and guttural, distinctly Velex, but the tone was different from the arrogant sneer Hale had grown accustomed to. This voice was full of urgency. Fallen. Repeat, the flagship has fallen. Imperator-class vessels are inbound. Eat at 20 minutes. All Velex forces, engage the enemy and delay at all costs. Glory to the Imperium. The message cut out, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Imperator-class, Varin muttered, his brow furrowed. Those are the Velex's capital ships. What the hell are they doing here? Hale's stomach dropped. He had a sinking feeling he knew exactly what was happening. The Velex hadn't just been testing them, they had been stalling. The destroyers and the flagship were bait, meant to distract the Resolute long enough for the real threat to arrive. Captain, Jones said, his voice tight with alarm. If those capital ships get here, we're dead. We barely survived the flagship. Hale's mind raced, calculating their options. The Resolute was a tough old ship, but it couldn't stand against an entire fleet of Velex capital ships. They needed a plan, and fast. How long until we can jump to FTL? Hale asked. At least 15 minutes, Varin replied. And that's if we can reroute power from the auxiliary systems to the FTL drive. Hale cursed under his breath. They didn't have 15 minutes. The Imperator-class vessels would be on them long before that. Captain, Carter said, her voice trembling, there's something else. I'm detecting multiple energy signatures approaching from the starboard side. It's not Velex. Hale frowned and turned to the tactical display. Sure enough, several unidentified ships were approaching fast, their energy signatures unlike anything Hale had seen before. "Can you identify them?" Hale asked. Carter shook her head. "No, sir. They're not using any known transponder codes." The tension on the bridge ratcheted up another notch. Unknown ships, Velix reinforcements on the way, and the Resolute barely hanging on it was the worst possible scenario. But Hale wasn't one to back down. He had a crew to protect and a mission to complete, and he wasn't about to let some unknown force or the Velix take them down without a fight. "Varin," Hale said, his voice steady, "get me visuals on those ships. Let's see who we're dealing with." The tactical screen shifted, and the image of the approaching ships appeared. Hale's eyes widened as he took in the sight. The ships were sleek and angular, with dark, reflective hulls that absorbed the light around them. Their design was unlike anything in human or Velix fleet's alien, but not in a way Hale could easily identify. "Sir, they're hailing us," Carter said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hale exchanged a glance with Varin and nodded. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and a figure appeared. It was humanoid, but taller and more imposing than any human or Velix. Its skin was a deep obsidian, and its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light. The alien spoke in a deep, resonant voice, its words translated by the ship's systems. "Human vessel," the alien said, "you are in grave danger. The Velix Imperium will destroy you if you remain here." Hale straightened in his chair, his mind working quickly. The alien didn't seem hostile, but he had no idea who they were or what their intentions were. "And who are you?" Hale asked cautiously. "What do you want?" The alien's glowing eyes narrowed slightly. "We are the HFY. We seek no quarrel with your kind, but the Velix are our enemy as well. We have come to offer assistance, for a price." Hale felt a chill run down his spine. Of course there was a price. There always was. "What kind of assistance?" Hale asked, keeping his voice steady. "We can delay the Velix reinforcements," the HFY replied. "Buy you enough time to escape. But in return, you will owe us a favor. A debt that must be repaid." Hale's eyes flicked to Varin and Jones, both of whom wore expressions of unease. This was a dangerous gamble. They didn't know anything about the HFY, and making deals with unknown aliens rarely ended well. But what choice did they have? Hale took a deep breath. "And if we refuse?" The HFY's expression remained neutral, but there was an edge to his voice. "Then the Velix will annihilate you, and we will watch." Hale clenched his jaw. It wasn't much of a choice. Either they accepted the HFY's offer and dealt with the consequences later, or they faced certain death at the hands of the Velix. After a long moment of silence, Hale made his decision. "All right," he said. "We'll take your deal." The HFY nodded, satisfaction gleaming in its glowing eyes. "Wise choice, human. We will hold the Velix at bay. You have 10 minutes to escape. Do not waste it." The transmission cut out, and the screen went dark. Hale turned to his crew, his voice firm. "Varin, get the FTL drive online. Jones, prepare for immediate jump as soon as we have the power. We're getting out of here." "Sir," Varin said, still looking uneasy, "do you really trust them?" Hale's expression hardened. "No, but right now, they're the only chance we've got." The Resolute lurched forward as Varin redirected power from the auxiliary systems to the FTL drive. The lights dimmed slightly, and the familiar hum of the engines filled the bridge. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, the weight of the approaching Velix fleet hanging over the crew like a guillotine. "FTL charge at 40%, Jones reported, his hands flying across the console. "It's going to be tight." Hale's eyes were glued to the tactical display, watching as the unknown ships now identified as the HFY moved into formation between the Resolute and the incoming Velix reinforcements. The alien vessels were surprisingly agile, maneuvering with a grace that belied their size. Whatever tech the HFY were packing, it was leagues ahead of anything Hale had seen before. Still, trusting them was a leap of faith. A necessary one, but dangerous nonetheless. "Captain," Carter said, her voice shaking slightly, "the Velex capital ships are entering weapons range. The ZHRX. They're moving to intercept." Hale watched as the ZHRX ships closed the distance with alarming speed, engaging the Velex head-on. Beams of energy and missile trails lit up the blackness of space, but the ZHRX ships were faster, more precise, dancing through the Velex volleys with unnerving efficiency. It was like watching predators toy with their prey. "Got him," Varin muttered under his breath. "I've never seen anything like that." Hale couldn't tear his eyes away from the display. The Velex capital ships, each bristling with weapons and armored like fortresses, were being systematically dismantled. One by one, they were picked apart by the ZHRX, their shields crumbling, their hulls breached by precision strikes. It was a massacre. And yet, the ZHRX were holding back. They weren't aiming for complete destruction. They were stalling just as they'd promised. "FTL charge at 70%, Jones said. "Almost there." Hale's mind was racing. The ZHRX had bought them time, but the price of that assistance still loomed in the back of his mind. What kind of favor would they demand? And what would happen if the ZHRX decided to turn on them once the Velex were dealt with? "Keep an eye on the ZHRX, Hale ordered. "I don't want any surprises once we're ready to jump." Varin nodded, his hands hovering over the controls. "Aye, Captain." Suddenly, the tactical display flashed red, and an alarm blared. "Sir," Carter shouted, panic rising in her voice. "Velex reinforcements just dropped out of FTL-3, more capital ships and a dozen escorts." Hale's heart sank. They were running out of time. The Velex reinforcements wasted no time, opening fire on the ZHRX and the Resolute simultaneously. The ZHRX ships were quick to respond, their weapons flaring to life as they engaged the new arrivals, but the sheer number of Velex ships was overwhelming. "FTL charge at 90%, Jones said, his voice strained. "Just a little longer." The Resolute shuddered as a stray Velex missile impacted their shields. The already weakened barrier flickered, then collapsed entirely, leaving the ship vulnerable. "Shields are down," Varin shouted. "We can't take another hit like that." Hale gripped the armrests of his chair, his mind racing. If they couldn't jump soon, they were finished. The ZHRX were doing everything they could to hold the Velex at bay, but even they couldn't last much longer against such overwhelming numbers. Come on," Hale muttered under his breath, his eyes flicking between the tactical display and the FTL charge percentage. The Velex ships were closing in, their weapons primed for the kill. The tactical display showed a barrage of incoming missiles and energy beams, all aimed directly at the Resolute. Hale's gut twisted. There was no way they could survive that. And then, just as the missiles were about to hit, the ZHRX made their move. Two of the alien ships broke formation and surged forward, positioning themselves between the Resolute and the incoming Velex attack. Their shields flared, absorbing the brunt of the assault, but the strain was immense. Hale watched in horror as one of the ZHRX ships was torn apart by the barrage, its hull disintegrating in a fiery explosion. The second ZHRX ship held on, its shields barely flickering, but it had bought the Resolute a few more precious seconds. "FTL at 100%, Jones shouted. "We're ready to jump." "Do it," Hale ordered, not hesitating for a second. Jones slammed his hand down on the console, and the Resolute's FTL drive roared to life. The stars stretched into long, bright lines, and the ship lurched forward, hurtling into faster-than-light speed. The bridge lights flickered, and for a moment, everything was silent. Hale let out a long, slow breath, feeling the tension drain from his body. They'd made it? Barely, but they'd made it. "Status?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Varin checked his console, his face pale. "We're in FTL, but the drive's barely holding together. We're looking at maybe 30 minutes before we need to drop out for repairs." Hale nodded, not surprised. The Resolute had taken more damage than it could handle. 30 minutes was better than nothing, but it wasn't much. "Where are we headed?" Hale asked, turning to Carter. "We're on course for the nearest neutral zone," she replied. "It's not far, but we'll need to make some major repairs before we can go any further." Hale leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It was a temporary reprieve, but the real problem wasn't over. The ZHRAC had kept their part of the bargain, but now they were owed something in return, and Hale had no idea what that might be. "Captain," Carter said hesitantly, "we're receiving another transmission." Hale frowned. "From the ZHRAC?" Carter shook her head. "No, sir. It's human." Hale's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected any friendly forces out here, especially in the middle of Velix territory. "Put it through," Hale said. The screen flickered, and the face of a grizzled human admiral appeared. His uniform was battle-worn, his expression hard, but there was a spark of recognition in his eyes as he saw Hale. "Captain Hale," the admiral said, his voice deep and authoritative. "I've been looking for you." Hale's heart skipped a beat. "Admiral Gray, I wasn't expecting to see you out here." Gray's expression darkened. "We've got bigger problems than you know, Captain. The Velix aren't just launching skirmishes anymore. They're moving for total war, and it's going to hit every human colony in this sector." Hale's stomach twisted. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold shiver down his spine. "How bad is it?" Hale asked, his voice tight. "Bad," Gray replied bluntly. "The Velix have already wiped out 2 of our outer colonies, and they're preparing for a full-scale invasion. We need every ship we've got, and that includes yours." Hale nodded, his mind already shifting into battle mode. The Resolute was barely holding together, but if humanity was facing an invasion, there was no time to rest. "What's the plan?" Hale asked. Gray's eyes gleamed with determination. "We're forming a defense line near the Sigma Expanse. We're gathering every available ship to make a stand. Get your ship patched up and get there as fast as you can." Hale straightened in his chair. "Understood, Admiral. We'll be there." Gray gave a curt nod, and the transmission cut out. For a moment, the bridge was silent. The weight of what was coming hung over them like a storm cloud. Hale rose from his chair, his expression grim. "Varin, get engineering on those repairs. Jones, plot a course for the Sigma Expanse as soon as we're out of FTL. We're heading into the fight." "Aye, Captain," Varin and Jones said in unison. As the crew scrambled to prepare for the next battle, Hale's thoughts drifted to the ZHRAC. The mysterious aliens had saved them, but at what cost? Whatever debt they now owed, it was bound to come due sooner or later. And Hale had a feeling that when it did, it would change everything. The Resolute dropped out of FTL in a sudden lurch, the stars snapping back into place around them. The dull hum of the engines had quieted to a worrying sputter, and the ship's systems flickered like a candle in the wind. They were barely holding together. Hale's stomach churned with tension as he stared out into the emptiness of space, knowing they were racing against the clock to get the ship patched up before the Velix came crashing down on them again. "Status report," Hale barked, rising from his chair as the bridge crew scrambled to assess their condition. "Shields are offline," Vern said, his voice tight with strain. "We've got multiple hull breaches, and the FTL drive needs at least 4 hours of repairs before we can risk another jump." "Captain," Jones added from his station, "we're drifting. Sublight engines are operating at 10% capacity. If we don't get them back online, we'll be sitting ducks." Hale clenched his jaw. 4 hours for the FTL drive. They didn't have that kind of time. He crossed the bridge in 2 quick strides, leaning over Jones' shoulder to get a better look at the tactical display. Their position wasn't great. They were just outside a small asteroid field in an uncharted region of space. No nearby planets or moons to take cover behind. If the Velix found them, there'd be no escape. "We've got to make those repairs faster," Hale said. "We're exposed out here." Varin nodded grimly. "I'll get down to engineering and see what we can do. But Captain, we're running low on resources. If we push the engines too hard, we could end up stranded. I know, Hale replied. But if we don't move, we're as good as dead anyway. Get down there and make it happen. Varn gave a sharp nod and rushed off the bridge, leaving Hale with the rest of the crew. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, but there was no time to dwell on it. Jones, scan for any sign of the Velex or those ZHRX ships. I want to know if we've got company, Hale ordered. Jones' fingers danced across his console as he initiated the scan. A few tense moments passed before he spoke again. No sign of the Velex, sir, Jones said, his tone cautiously optimistic. And the ZHRX, they're gone. No ships in the vicinity. Hale frowned. It was a relief, but it was also unsettling. The ZHRX had been their mysterious saviors, but now they were gone, leaving more questions than answers. Hale had a bad feeling that their sudden departure wasn't the end of the story. Keep scanning, Hale said. I want to know if anything changes. He turned to Carter. Any word from the fleet? Carter shook her head. Nothing yet, Captain. We're too far out, and our long-range comms are down. We won't be able to send or receive until we get them back online. Damn. Hale rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were isolated, stranded, and on borrowed time. But they weren't helpless. All right, Hale said, clapping his hands together as if to rally his own spirits as much as the crew's. Let's make the most of the time we've got. Varen's working on the engines, but we're not going to just sit here waiting to get picked off. Jones, plot a course through that asteroid field. We can use the debris for cover, maybe buy us some time. Jones nodded and got to work. Hale stepped back to his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. They were in a tight spot, no doubt about it. But if there was one thing he'd learned over his years in command, it was that humans didn't quit. No matter how bad things got, there was always a way forward. That's when the proximity alarm blared, and Hale's heart jumped into his throat. Incoming, Carter shouted. Velex ships, 3 of them, just dropped out of FTL. Damn it, Hale cursed. How much time until they're in weapons range? 5 minutes, tops, Carter replied, her fingers flying across her console. Hale's mind raced. They couldn't fight, not in their current state. The Velex ships would tear them apart in seconds. Their only hope was to make a run for the asteroid field, but even then, it was a long shot. The Resolute was barely moving. We need more time, Hale muttered under his breath, thinking fast. Jones, how far are we from the asteroids? Too far to get there before they catch up, Captain, Jones said, his voice tense. At our current speed, they'll be on top of us in less than 2 minutes. Hale's eyes flicked to the tactical display. 3 Velex ships, all fast, all deadly. They'd be within range any moment now, and there was no way the Resolute could outrun them. They were out of options. Unless... Jones, Hale said, a sudden idea forming in his mind. Can we detonate one of the sublight engine cores remotely? Jones blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. Yes, sir. But why? Because, Hale said, his mind racing ahead, if we can time it right, we might be able to use the blast to propel us into the asteroid field. It won't be pretty, but it'll give us a burst of speed. And if the Velex are close enough, the explosion might take one of them out. Jones stared at him for a moment. Then his eyes widened as he realized what Hale was getting at. It's risky, Captain, if we don't time it perfectly. We won't get another chance, Hale interrupted, his voice firm. Set it up. Jones nodded, already working on the calculations. Hale turned to the rest of the crew. Listen up, everyone. We're about to do something crazy, but it's the only shot we've got. If this works, we'll be able to reach the asteroids and buy ourselves some time. If it doesn't, well, let's not think about that. The crew nodded, their faces grim but determined. They trusted him, and Hale wasn't about to let them down. Ready, Captain, Jones said, his fingers hovering over the controls. The sublight core is primed for detonation. On your mark. Hale took a deep breath, his eyes locked on the tactical display. The Velix ships were closing fast, their weapons hot and ready. This was it. Do it, Hale said. Jones hit the button, and for a brief second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the rear sublight engine core detonated, sending a shockwave rippling through the ship. The Resolute lurched forward, hurtling toward the asteroid field at a speed far beyond what its crippled engines could normally achieve. The crew held on for dear life as the ship rocketed through space, the force of the explosion nearly tearing them apart. The Velix ships, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver, were left scrambling to adjust their trajectories. And then, just as Hale had hoped, the shockwave from the explosion reached one of the Velix ships. The enemy vessel was too close to escape, and the blast ripped through its shields, causing a catastrophic hull breach. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending debris flying in all directions. "One down," Carter shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Hale allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but they weren't out of the woods yet. The remaining 2 Velix ships were still on their tail, and the Resolute was careening toward the asteroid field at breakneck speed. "Brace for impact," Hale shouted as the ship barreled into the outer edges of the asteroid field. The Resolute's hull groaned in protest as it scraped past massive chunks of rock, narrowly avoiding a collision with a particularly large asteroid. "Jones, bring us deeper into the field," Hale ordered. "Use the asteroids for cover." "Aye, Captain," Jones replied, guiding the ship through the treacherous terrain with expert precision. The Velix ships hesitated at the edge of the asteroid field, wary of following the Resolute into the hazardous environment. Hale watched them on the tactical display, his heart pounding in his chest. "Looks like they're not eager to chase us in here," Carter said, a hint of relief in her voice. Hale didn't share her optimism. The Velix might be holding back for now, but they wouldn't stay away for long. They'd regroup, rearm, and come at them with everything they had. "Keep us moving," Hale said. "We need to stay hidden until Varan gets those repairs done." As the Resolute weaved its way deeper into the asteroid field, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that their luck was running out. The Velix weren't the only threat out here. There were other dangers lurking in the shadows, dangers they hadn't even begun to understand. The Resolute slid deeper into the asteroid field, weaving between massive chunks of rock that floated ominously in the cold expanse of space. Hale's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his command chair. Every second felt like a gamble, every turn a potential death sentence. Yet Jones, ever focused, was maneuvering them with pinpoint precision, guiding the ship with an instinct that only came from years of flying on the edge. The Velix ships had hesitated at the outer edge of the asteroid field, clearly unwilling to follow them into such treacherous terrain. For the moment, they were safe, but Hale knew the reprieve wouldn't last long. The Velix were calculating, not cowards. They would find a way to flush them out, or worse, wait them out. "Captain," Jones said, breaking the tense silence, "I've found a dense cluster of smaller asteroids up ahead. If we tuck in, we might be able to hide from their sensors for a while. It's risky, but it's better than drifting in the open." Hale nodded, weighing their options. They couldn't afford to just sit still. Waiting wasn't survival. But hiding, even temporarily, might give Varan and his engineering team the time they needed to get the ship moving again. "Do it," Hale ordered, his tone sharp. "Find us a hiding spot, and let's hope we're out of the Velix's sights." The Resolute adjusted course, slipping through the narrow gaps between asteroids, each movement making the ship groan in protest. The structural integrity was holding, but barely. Hale's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. The Velix weren't the only problem. Any misstep here could mean smashing into a rock the size of a moon. "Carter, get me an update from Varan. I want to know how close we are to getting the engines back online," Hale said, breaking the silence. His fingers drummed impatiently on his console, the anxiety gnawing at him. Carter quickly relayed the message to engineering, her face tight with concentration as she waited for a response. After a tense few moments, she turned back to Hale. "Varan says they've managed to stabilize the FTL drive's power flow, but they still need at least another hour before it's fully operational. They're also working on patching the sublight engines, but it's slow going, Captain. They're doing everything they can. Tell him to keep at it. We're buying him as much time as we can, but we need those engines sooner rather than later." As Carter sent the message, Hale's eyes locked onto the tactical display, where the 2 remaining Velex ships hovered just outside the asteroid field. They were holding position, their weapons hot, as if daring the Resolute to come out and face them. Hale knew what they were doing. They were waiting for the Resolute to emerge, weakened and desperate. They knew the human ship couldn't stay hidden forever. But Hale wasn't planning on waiting for their trap to spring. "Jones," Hale said, his voice calm but firm, "keep an eye on the Velex ships. Let me know the second they make a move." Jones nodded, his eyes glued to the sensors. Time passed agonizingly slow, the minutes ticking by in what felt like hours. Hale's mind raced through a dozen different strategies, but they all came down to the same conclusion: they needed to escape. There was no way the Resolute could take on 2 Velex ships, not in their current condition. The thought of abandoning the fight gnawed at his pride, but Hale wasn't foolish enough to let pride lead his crew into certain death. Suddenly, a new blip appeared on the tactical screen. "Captain, I've got something," Jones said, his voice urgent. "Another ship, coming out of FTL." Hale's heart sank as he leaned over to study the display. Another Velex ship? No, it wasn't one of theirs. The design was different. "It's not Velex," Jones confirmed, his brow furrowed. "I don't recognize the signature." Hale's mind raced, but before he could even ask for more details, the ship began transmitting on an open channel. The communication was audio only, and the voice that came through was deep, metallic, and distinctly alien. "This is Commander Dalek of the ZHRAC," the voice rumbled, unmistakably familiar to Hale now. "Human vessel, you are in danger. We have returned to assist you." Hale's eyes widened in disbelief. The ZHRAC, the mysterious alien race that had vanished after intervening in the initial battle, were back. But why? And more importantly, could they be trusted? Jones and Carter exchanged uneasy glances, but Hale remained focused. The ZHRAC had saved them once, albeit for reasons still unclear. Now they were offering help again, and Hale knew they didn't have the luxury of being picky with their allies. Hale hit the comms button, his voice steady. "This is Captain Hale of the Resolute. We appreciate the assistance, Commander Dalek, but what's your angle here? Why are you helping us?" There was a brief pause, and when Dalek responded, his tone was cryptic, yet tinged with an almost predatory amusement. "We seek balance, Captain. The Velex have disrupted that balance by extending their aggression beyond their mandate. We have our own reasons for wanting to see them humbled." Hale didn't like the sound of that. He had no idea what kind of politics the ZHRAC were playing at. But right now, they were offering him a lifeline, and that was more than the Velex were offering. "Understood," Hale said, deciding not to push further. "What do you propose?" "We will engage the Velex," Dalek replied, his voice cold and measured. "While they are distracted, your ship will be given time to complete its repairs and escape. Do not engage unless you wish to invite their wrath upon yourself." Hale clenched his jaw. The idea of running while the ZHRAC fought for them left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he had no other options. Fighting the Velex head-on would be suicide, and they needed to get the Resolute out of here intact. "Very well," Hale said. "We'll stand down and focus on repairs." "Good. Do not interfere," Dalek said, and the transmission cut off abruptly. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the ZHRX ship moved toward the waiting Velex vessels. The 2 enemy ships immediately adjusted their positions, their weapons pivoting to target the new threat. Hale could feel the unease ripple through his crew, but he kept his focus locked on the tactical display. As the ZHRX ship closed in, the first Velex ship fired, sending a volley of plasma torpedoes streaking through space. But the ZHRX vessel was fast, much faster than it had any right to be. It dodged the incoming fire with ease, returning a barrage of energy bolts that slammed into the Velix ship's shields. "Captain," Jones said, his voice low, "I've never seen a ship move like that before." Hale nodded, watching the ZHRX ship dance through the Velix assault with almost eerie precision. It was clear that the ZHRX were far more advanced than the Velix had anticipated. They were playing a game the Velix didn't even know existed. And for now, that worked in Hale's favor. "Carter, tell Varn we've got a window," Hale said, his voice steady. "They need to finish those repairs fast. We might not get another chance." Carter relayed the message, and the minutes that followed were some of the longest of Hale's life. The battle outside raged on, with the ZHRX ship pulling off maneuver after maneuver that left the Velix struggling to keep up. But even as the ZHRX ship held the upper hand, Hale knew it was only a matter of time before the Velix adapted. They were nothing if not resilient. Finally, Carter turned back to Hale with a tight nod. "Varn says the FTL drive is operational, Captain. We can jump anytime." Hale didn't hesitate. "Jones, plot a course away from the asteroid field. We're getting the hell out of here." Jones' fingers flew across the console as he plotted their escape vector. Within seconds, the course was set, and the Resolute began powering up its FTL drive. As the countdown to jump began, Hale cast one last glance at the tactical display. The ZHRX ship was still holding its own, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. They had to get out now, while they still could. The FTL drive engaged with a lurch, and the stars blurred into streaks of light as the Resolute leapt into faster-than-light travel, leaving the Velix and the ZHRX behind. As the ship stabilized and the crew let out a collective sigh of relief, Hale sank back into his chair, his mind still racing. They had escaped, but the questions that remained gnawed at him. What were the ZHRX playing at? Why had they really intervened? And most importantly, what was the cost of their aid? The Resolute hurtled through the swirling chaos of faster-than-light travel, the stars reduced to smeared trails of light as the ship raced away from the battlefield. For the moment, they were free from the clutches of the Velix. But Hale knew better than to relax too soon. Space had a way of turning the tables when you least expected it. He glanced around the bridge, taking in the tense faces of his crew. Jones was hunched over his console, eyes darting between readings as he ensured their course was clear. Carter looked drained, but she held herself steady, keeping a close watch on communications, ready for anything. Even with their temporary escape, the weight of the battle still hung heavy over them all. "Status report," Hale ordered, breaking the heavy silence. Jones was the first to respond, his voice flat but steady. "We're clear of immediate Velix pursuit, Captain. No sign of them on long-range sensors, though that doesn't mean they've given up. We're on course for the rendezvous point. Estimated arrival in 45 minutes. "Good," Hale muttered, his mind already moving to the next potential threat. The Velix might be out of the picture for now, but there were still too many unanswered questions. The ZHRX intervention had saved their hides, but the ambiguity surrounding their motives made him uneasy. "Carter, open a secure channel to Varn," Hale said, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the arm of his chair. Carter tapped her console, then nodded. "You're live, Captain." "Varn," Hale called out, leaning forward. "What's the status on our sublight engines? We may have bought ourselves some time, but we can't rely on FTL alone if things go south." Varn's voice came through the speakers, gruff but composed. "We've patched them up enough to limp along, Captain, but they're nowhere near full capacity. Best we can manage is about half thrust. It'll be enough for basic maneuvering, but don't expect anything fancy until we get to a proper dry dock." Hale frowned. Half thrust wasn't ideal. If the Velix found them again, outrunning them on sublight alone wouldn't be an option. They were still relying heavily on the hope that the ZHRX had kept the enemy busy. "Understood. Keep working on it. I want to know if there's any way to squeeze more power out of those engines." Captain. Varn out. Hale leaned back in his chair, the tension gnawing at his insides. The respite was fragile, and the memory of the ZHRX's cryptic message echoed in his mind. They had claimed to be restoring balance, but what did that truly mean? The thought was interrupted as Carter's console chimed. She immediately checked the incoming transmission and shot a glance at Hale. Captain, we're receiving another message from the ZHRX. It's Commander Dalek. Hale's jaw tightened. Of course they weren't done. Put it through. The familiar, deep voice of Commander Dalek filled the bridge. Captain Hale, I trust your ship is now in relative safety. Hale's tone was guarded. For the moment, thanks to your intervention. There was a pause, and Hale could almost imagine the cold amusement behind Dalek's words. Indeed, the Veleks have been neutralized for now. But I suspect you are wondering why we chose to intervene at all. That's putting it mildly, Hale replied. You saved us twice now, but you've also been vague about your reasons. What's the real play here, Dalek? The ZHRX commander's tone shifted, becoming more serious. The Veleks are not the only threat in this galaxy, Captain. Your human race has drawn the attention of many, both friend and foe. My people have observed your kind from the shadows, and we see potential to shift the balance of power among the stars. We do not act out of charity, Captain. We act because your survival furthers our goals. Hale narrowed his eyes, suspicion flaring. And what exactly are those goals? Survival, Dalek answered simply, just as it is for you. The Veleks believe themselves dominant, but they are blind to the larger dangers. There are forces at play in this galaxy that they cannot begin to comprehend. Your continued existence helps to weaken the Veleks' position, and for now, that suits our purposes. Hale absorbed the information, trying to piece together the bigger picture. The ZHRX had shown their hand, or at least part of it. They were using humanity as a pawn in a larger game, a game whose rules Hale didn't fully understand. But if humanity could survive by playing along for the moment, he wasn't about to refuse their help. And what happens when your goals no longer align with ours? Hale asked, testing the waters. Then we part ways, Dalek said, his voice unflinching. But until that time comes, Captain, know this. The Veleks will not stop hunting you. Even now, they are regrouping, searching for ways to reclaim their perceived dominance. They will come for you again. Be ready. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Hale and his crew in a tense silence. The warning hung in the air like a dark cloud. Carter broke the quiet first, her face pale. Captain, do you think the ZHRX will turn on us once we're no longer useful to them? Hale shook his head. That's not the question we should be asking right now. The real question is how long can we afford to trust them? Jones shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. It doesn't sound like we have much choice, Captain. The Veleks aren't going to back off, and the ZHRX, they're clearly playing the long game. Whatever that game is. Exactly, Hale said, and we need to figure out where we fit into it. For now, they're an ally, albeit a temporary one. But we can't rely on them forever. Sooner or later, we're going to have to stand on our own. Hale's thoughts turned toward their next steps. They had escaped the immediate threat, but the galaxy was vast, and enemies were everywhere. If the ZHRX were right, the Veleks wouldn't let this defeat slide. They would come back stronger, and next time, they might not have a mysterious benefactor to save them. Jones, adjust our course, Hale ordered, his voice firm. Take us to the outer systems. We need to lay low and regroup. I want a full diagnostic on every system, and I want it fast. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Jones gave a nod and swiftly altered their trajectory, the ship adjusting course smoothly. As the ship hummed with the sounds of routine operations, Hale sat back, allowing the weight of the situation to settle in. The ZHRX had revealed a glimpse of a larger, more dangerous galaxy, one where humanity's place was far from secure. For now, they had allies, but those alliances were built on shifting sands. Hale's gaze lingered on the stars streaking by outside the viewports. They were heading into the unknown again, but that had always been humanity's way, pushing forward into the darkness, no matter the odds. And this time, Hale was determined to make sure they were ready. Time passed in a tense quiet on the bridge of the Resolute. The starry expanse outside the viewport seemed endless, and for once, the crew found no solace in its beauty. Hale kept his hands clasped behind his back, gazing into the void, while Jones and Carter worked diligently at their consoles. Every second felt like a countdown to something inevitable. The ZHRX warning echoed in Hale's mind, and he knew that their window of opportunity was shrinking. They had to prepare, but without knowing the full extent of the Velex's next move, that was easier said than done. "How are diagnostics coming along?" Hale asked, not taking his eyes off the stars. "Still running, Captain," Jones replied. "Sublight engines are holding at half thrust, just like Varan said. Shields are functional, but could use more power if we hit any real turbulence. We might be in trouble." Hale nodded grimly. "Any sign of the Velex?" Carter answered this time. "No sign of pursuit, sir. But the comms are still picking up background static from that battle. It's possible they're masking their approach." "Possible, but not likely," Hale said, mostly to himself. The Velex didn't rely on tricks. They were the hammer that smashed through defenses, not the scalpel that sliced from the shadows. Still, his gut told him they weren't in the clear yet. "Captain," Jones said cautiously, "if the ZHRX are right, and the Velex are regrouping, how long do you think we have?" Hale finally turned to face his crew, his expression unreadable. "If they were anything like us, I'd say we had days, maybe weeks. But the Velex don't think like us. They'll come when they're ready, not a moment sooner or later." As if on cue, Varan's voice crackled through the shipwide comm. "Captain, we've got a situation down in engineering." Hale's jaw clenched. "Go ahead, Varan." "We're detecting a power drain on the secondary core. We've been tracking it for a few minutes now, and it's growing. At this rate, we'll lose half our power reserves within the hour." Hale's eyes narrowed. "What's causing it?" "We're not sure, Captain. It's not a standard malfunction. Could be external something's leaching power from us." Hale's mind raced. This couldn't be a coincidence. Could it be sabotage? Did something get aboard the Resolute during the battle? "It's possible," Varan admitted, "but we've swept the ship and found nothing unusual. Whatever it is, it's sneaky, and it's draining us fast." "Get a team on it," Hale ordered. "We can't afford to lose power right now." "Already on it, sir. Varan out." Hale cursed under his breath. The last thing they needed was a mysterious power drain, especially when they were still licking their wounds from the battle. If the Velex did catch up, they'd be sitting ducks with half their power reserves gone. "Captain," Carter said hesitantly, "I've been reviewing the comm logs from the battle. There's something odd." A signal came through just before the power drain started. It was brief, almost like a pulse, but it's not something I've seen before. Hale's brow furrowed. "Show me." Carter tapped a few commands, and the signal appeared on the main display. It was a short burst of energy, barely detectable against the background noise of space, but it was there an unmistakable anomaly. "Can you trace it?" Hale asked. Carter shook her head. "It's too weak to pinpoint, but it originated from somewhere inside the Resolute." "Inside?" Jones echoed, his eyes wide. "You mean, one of us sent it?" "Or something," Hale said darkly. His mind went to the Velex. Had they planted something on board without their knowledge? The thought gnawed at him, but there was no time for speculation. "Lock down all critical systems," Hale commanded. "I want full security sweeps on every deck. If something's been planted on this ship, I want it found and neutralized." Jones and Carter snapped into action, executing the captain's orders without hesitation. The air in the bridge grew heavier as the sense of urgency deepened. Time was running out, and they still didn't know who or what was behind this. Just as the tension peaked, the ship jolted violently, the the deck shaking beneath their feet. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. "Captain, we've lost power to the port thrusters," Jones called out, his fingers flying across the console. "We're drifting." Hale slammed his hand down on the intercom. "Varan, what the hell is happening down there?" Varan's voice came back, strained. "We've got a serious malfunction, Captain. The power drain is accelerating. We're losing control of the core." "Shut it down," Hale barked. "I don't care what you have to do, get that core offline." "We're trying, but something's locking us out." Varan's frustration was palpable. "It's like the ship's systems are fighting us." Hale's mind raced. This wasn't just a malfunction. This was deliberate. "Jones, get me a full scan of the ship now," Hale demanded, his voice sharp. Jones quickly complied, pulling up the internal scans on the display. As the data streamed in, his face paled. "Captain, we've got an unidentified signal coming from the cargo bay. It's transmitting a pulse every few seconds, like it's communicating with something outside the ship." Hale's blood ran cold. The Velex weren't the kind to leave loose ends, but if they'd somehow managed to plant a device during the battle, it explained the power drain and the signal Carter had detected. "Get a team down there, now," Hale ordered. "I want that thing found and destroyed." Jones nodded and relayed the orders, while Hale steeled himself for what was coming next. The Resolute was being sabotaged from within, and if they didn't act fast, they'd lose more than just power. Minutes passed like hours, and the tension on the bridge grew unbearable. Hale paced, his mind working through every possibility. Had the Velex anticipated this? Was this all part of their plan to draw them out, to weaken them before the final blow? "Captain," Jones said, breaking the silence, "security team reports they've located the device in the cargo bay. It's some kind of transmitter, non-human technology. They're working on disarming it." Hale felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. The ship shook again, harder this time, and the lights dimmed further. The hum of the engines faltered, then returned at half their usual power. "Sir, we've just lost main engine power," Carter said, her voice tight with worry. "We're dead in the water." Before Hale could respond, the viewscreen flickered to life. A shadow loomed in the distance, a massive Velex warship emerging from the darkness of space. "They've found us," Hale muttered, his heart sinking. "Battle stations. Prepare for incoming fire." The crew snapped into action, but the reality was grim. They were crippled, barely able to move, and now they were facing a Velex warship twice their size. The odds were impossible. But Hale wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Jones," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "I want a firing solution on that ship. We may be down, but we're not out." Jones hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Aye, Captain. Targeting their engines now." Hale's jaw clenched as he stared at the enemy vessel on the screen. The Resolute may have been a rust bucket in the eyes of the galaxy, but it wasn't about to go down without a fight. And if the Velex wanted a fight, Hale would give them one they'd never forget. The enemy warship loomed on the viewscreen, a dark silhouette against the stars, bristling with weapons that could obliterate the Resolute in moments. Hale's fists clenched as he watched the Velex ship slowly close the distance. Their arrogance was clear. They weren't even bothering with evasive maneuvers. They didn't need to. They thought the Resolute was dead in space, an easy kill. "Firing solution ready, Captain," Jones reported, his voice tense but steady. Hale's mind raced. They were running on half power, their shields were weak, and their engines were crippled. But they still had one card left to play, the element of surprise. The Velex didn't know that the Resolute still had teeth, and Hale intended to make them pay for underestimating his ship. "Lock onto their forward weapons array," Hale ordered. "If we can disable their primary guns, it might buy us some time." Jones nodded, fingers moving swiftly across his console. "Target locked. Ready to fire on your command." Hale hesitated for just a moment, weighing their options. They couldn't hope to win a straight-up battle with the Velex ship. But if they could cripple it, Even for a short time, they might be able to make an escape or at least level the playing field. "Fire," Hale said, his voice cold and determined. The Resolute's forward cannons roared to life, spewing a barrage of plasma rounds at the Velox warship. The ship trembled under the force of its own weapons, and for a brief moment, Hale allowed himself a flicker of hope. The plasma rounds streaked toward the enemy vessel, and for a split second, he thought they might catch the Velox off guard. But then the Velox ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the impact with a shimmering blue field. The plasma rounds dissipated harmlessly, and the Velox ship continued its approach, unscathed. "Damn it," Hale muttered under his breath. "Captain, their shields are stronger than we thought," Jones said, his voice laced with frustration. "We barely made a dent." Hale's mind raced. They couldn't take the Velox head on, not with the Resolute in its current state. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to. "Jones, target their engines," Hale ordered. "Full power to the cannons. If we can't destroy them, we'll at least slow them down." "Aye, sir," Jones replied, adjusting the targeting parameters. Recalibrating for engine strike. The Resolute's cannons fired again, this time focusing on the Velox ship's engines. Plasma rounds slammed into the Velox warship's aft section, and for a brief moment, Hale saw a flicker of something damaged, perhaps. But the Velox ship's shields flared again, absorbing most of the impact. "They're still coming," Carter warned from her station. "And they're charging weapons." Hale felt a cold knot of dread settle in his gut. They were out of time. The Velox were going to open fire, and in the Resolute's current state, they wouldn't survive the first volley. But then, just as the Velox ship's weapons began to glow with power, something unexpected happened. The enemy ship hesitated. It was subtle, barely noticeable at first, but the Velox warship seemed to falter in its approach. The energy buildup in its weapons dimmed, and for a moment, it almost seemed as though the ship was reconsidering its attack. "What's going on?" Hale demanded, leaning forward in his chair. "Why aren't they firing?" "I don't know, sir," Carter replied, her fingers dancing across her console. "I'm picking up some kind of interference in their systems. It's like their weight. Sir, we're receiving a transmission." "A transmission?" Hale's eyes narrowed. "From the Velox?" "No, sir. It's coming from inside the ship." Carter's face paled. "From the cargo bay." Hale's blood ran cold. The transmitter, the device they'd found in the cargo bay, the one they thought they'd disarmed. Could it still be active? Could it be sending a signal to the Velox ship? "Put it through," Hale ordered. The viewscreen flickered, and a familiar figure appeared, a figure Hale had never expected to see again. It was Corin. The ZHRAC commander stood tall and proud, his features stern and unyielding. But there was something different about him, now something darker, more sinister. "Captain Hale," Corin said, his voice cold and detached. "I must commend you on your resilience. Most would have given up by now. But you've proven to be more resourceful than I anticipated." "Corin," Hale growled, his hands tightening into fists. "What is this? What the hell are you doing?" Corin smiled, a cruel, calculating expression. "I'm afraid I haven't been entirely honest with you, Captain. You see, the ZHRAC were never interested in peace with humanity. Our alliance was temporary, a means to an end." Hale's eyes narrowed. "You used us." "Of course," Corin replied without hesitation. "The Velox were a threat to us both, and I needed your help to neutralize them. But now that the immediate threat has been dealt with, I no longer require your assistance." "So you're working with the Velox now?" Hale demanded, his voice thick with disbelief. "After everything they did to your people?" Corin's smile widened. "Not quite. The Velox are still our enemies, but I've found a way to repurpose their technology for our own use." The realization hit Hale like a punch to the gut. The transmitter in the cargo bay, it wasn't just a Velox device. It was ZHRAC tech, modified to control Velox ships. Corin had been manipulating the Velox all along, using their own technology against them. "You're insane," Hale said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You think you can control the Velex? They'll tear you apart the moment they realize what you're doing." Corrin's expression darkened. "You underestimate us, Captain. The Zharak have always been adaptable, and now, with the Velex at our command, we will dominate the stars. Humanity's time is over." Hale's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was a war for the future of the galaxy, and Corrin had just declared himself humanity's enemy. "Corrin," Hale said slowly, "you've made a big mistake. You think you can control the Velex, but you're wrong. They'll turn on you, and when they do, you'll wish you hadn't crossed us." Corrin's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, emotionless stare. "We shall see, Captain. But for now, your ship is dead in space, and you are at my mercy." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Hale felt a surge of anger and frustration, but he forced himself to stay calm. Corrin might have the upper hand for now, but Hale wasn't about to let him win without a fight. "Jones," Hale said, his voice steady, "I want that transmitter destroyed. I don't care how, blow it up, fry it, whatever you have to do. Just get it off my ship." "Aye, Captain," Jones replied, his hands flying across the console. "Working on it now." As Jones worked to disable the transmitter, Hale's mind raced. Corrin had shown his hand, but that didn't mean the game was over. The Resolute was still in danger, and they had to find a way to stop the Velex warship before it regained full control. But even as Hale strategized, he knew the odds were against them. Corrin had set this trap perfectly, and now the Resolute was on the verge of being destroyed or worse, captured. "Captain," Carter said, her voice trembling, "the Velex ship is powering up again. They're going to fire." Hale's heart pounded. Time was running out, and their options were dwindling. But Hale wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "Jones," Hale said, his voice calm but firm, "prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not going down without a fight." The Resolute may have been crippled, but Hale wasn't about to let it become Corrin's pawn. He'd find a way to stop the Velex and Corrin no matter what it took. The moment hung in the air, fraught with tension. The Velex warship began to glow with a deadly light as its weapons prepared to fire. The Resolute was limping, crippled in both shields and engines, and even with their best efforts, they were mere moments away from annihilation. Hale's mind churned through possibilities. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and out of time. But surrender was not an option, not when humanity's fate hung in the balance. Then, just as the energy on the Velex ship reached a critical mass, Jones shouted from his console, "Captain, I've done it. The transmitter's fried." The relief was short-lived. Though the Velex ship hesitated once more, its looming threat remained. With or without Corrin's interference, it was still an enemy vessel bent on their destruction. Hale tightened his grip on the armrest of his chair, thinking. Corrin's gambit to control the Velex had failed, but the enemy fleet remained an imminent threat. Even with the transmitter gone, they had no time to escape. But there was one thing left, a final gamble, something Hale had hoped to avoid. He glanced at Carter, then at the grim faces of his crew. "We're not done yet," Hale growled. "Jones, do we still have power for a short-range jump?" Jones looked up, sweat beading on his brow. "Captain, if we jump with the engines in their current state, we could rip the ship apart." Hale's voice was low but firm. "If we stay here, we're already dead. I need an answer." Jones hesitated, then nodded grimly. "We have just enough power for one short-range jump, but it'll fry the engines for good. After that, we'll be adrift." Hale glanced at the enemy warship, its weapons primed for the kill. His decision was made. "Plot a jump directly behind their aft," Hale ordered, standing up from his chair. "When we reappear, we'll be inside their blind spot. Load everything we've got into the plasma cannons and prepare for point-blank range fire. This is our last shot." The crew snapped into action. Jones worked furiously at his station. plotting the coordinates while Carter diverted what little energy they had left into the remaining systems. Hale watched as the seconds ticked by, knowing that any miscalculation could be their doom. "Jump coordinates locked," Jones said, his voice barely concealing his nerves. "Engaging FTL in 5, 4, 3. Hale braced himself against the console, his jaw clenched tight. 2, 1. Now. The Resolute lurched violently as it engaged its short-range jump drive, hurtling forward through space in a burst of speed. For a split second, the stars around them blurred, and then the ship reappeared right behind the Velix warship. "Fire everything," Hale barked the instant they emerged. The Resolute's plasma cannons roared to life in unison, unloading their full payload into the exposed rear of the Velix vessel. At this range, the enemy ship's shields were overwhelmed in an instant. Explosions rippled across its hull as the concentrated plasma blast tore through critical systems. Hale watched in grim satisfaction as the Velix warship shuddered violently under the assault. Its engines flickered, and then miraculously went dark. The ship's forward momentum halted, and it drifted listlessly through space, powerless and defeated. "Direct hit," Jones confirmed, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Their engines are down. They're dead in the water, Captain." A wave of relief swept through the bridge, but Hale remained focused. This wasn't over yet, not with Corrin still out there. "Carter," Hale said, turning to her, "scan the area. I want to know if Corrin is on that ship, or if he's still out there playing his games." Carter worked quickly, her fingers moving across her console. "I'm detecting no life signs aboard the Velix ship," she reported after a moment. "Corrin's not there." Hale's lips tightened. It figured. Corrin had been using them from the beginning, pulling strings from the shadows, and now that his plan had failed, he was nowhere to be found. "What about the rest of the Velix fleet?" Hale asked, his eyes narrowing. Carter glanced at her readings, her expression one of cautious optimism. "The rest of the fleet is falling back. It looks like they weren't expecting us to take out their flagship." "They're retreating?" Hale couldn't quite believe it. After everything, it seemed like the tide had finally turned. "For now," Carter said, "but I don't think they'll stay gone for long." Hale nodded slowly, understanding the implication. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Velix would regroup, and Corrin was still out there somewhere, planning his next move. But for now, they had a moment of respite. Hale turned to the view screen, watching as the Velix fleet disappeared into the distance. They had survived, against all odds. The Resolute was battered and broken, but still standing. And that, Hale thought, was enough. "Captain," Jones said, breaking the silence, "what are your orders?" Hale exhaled, feeling the weight of the past few hours settle on his shoulders. He looked around the bridge at his crew, tired, battered, but alive. They had earned this victory, but the road ahead was still long. "Jones," Hale said, his voice steady, "send out a distress signal. Let the fleet know we're still here, and we'll need a tow." Jones nodded and began transmitting. As the crew worked to stabilize the ship, Hale allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The Velix had been a terrifying force, nearly impossible to defeat. But in the end, they had been their own undoing. Their arrogance had blinded them to the truth. They had underestimated humanity. They had sneered at the Resolute, calling it a rust bucket, thinking it was no match for their superior firepower. They had been wrong. The Velix would return. Corrin would strike again. But Hale knew now that humanity could stand against any threat, no matter how powerful or advanced. Because the Resolute, for all its rust and flaws, had something the Velix could never understand: heart, grit, and the unshakable will to survive. As the stars stretched out before him, Hale smiled grimly. This wasn't the end of the war, but it was a victory, and for today, that was enough. The Resolute glided into the orbital dry dock, its hull scarred from the battle, but still intact. The hangar bays bustled with activity, engineers and technicians swarming over the ship's battle-worn exterior, preparing it for a full overhaul. The scars of war ran deep, but the ship had survived against all odds. Inside, Captain Hale sat quietly in his ready room, the sounds of repair work echoing faintly through the bulkheads. He leaned back in his chair, gazing out the viewport at the stars. His thoughts were a mix of exhaustion and reflection. They had won, but the cost had been high. The door hissed open, and Lieutenant Carter stepped inside, datapad in hand. "Captain," she began, her voice a mixture of relief and concern. "The Fleet Command has sent its congratulations. We're being hailed as heroes for stopping the Velix flagship." Hale nodded absently. "And Corin?" Carter frowned. "He's gone. Slipped away during the chaos. We lost his signal somewhere in the aftermath." Hale's fist clenched. Corin was a phantom, a cunning tactician who always seemed to stay one step ahead. The Velix fleet had retreated, but their true leader was still out there, plotting. "Captain," Carter continued, "there's something else. We just received a distress call from the Outer Rim Sector Gamma 9. Hale's gaze snapped to her. "What happened?" Carter handed him the datapad. "It's from a deep space exploration fleet. They've been monitoring Velix activity near the border, but now they're reporting strange energy readings. Ships have gone dark. No communication, no signs of life." Hale studied the report. The Outer Rim was a volatile region, but nothing like this had been recorded before. "What kind of energy readings?" "They're not sure. It's unlike anything they've encountered. They're requesting immediate assistance." Hale rose from his chair, his mind already racing. The Velix had retreated, but this was no time to relax. Something else was brewing. "Tell the crew to prepare for launch," Hale ordered. "We're heading out to Gamma 9. Carter hesitated. "Captain, the ship's barely held together as it is. The engineers need at least another few days to finish repairs." Hale's jaw tightened. "We don't have a few days. We've faced worse. We're going." Carter nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood, sir." As she turned to leave, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far bigger than a simple reconnaissance mission. The Velix had been a formidable enemy, but this felt different, ancient even. Within hours, the Resolute was back in open space, its damaged systems still functional, but far from optimal. The journey to Gamma 9 would take several days, giving the crew some time to regroup, though the atmosphere remained tense. "Captain," Jones called out from his station on the bridge, breaking the silence. "We're approaching the Outer Rim. We should have visual confirmation on the exploration fleet soon." Hale nodded, standing up from his chair and moving toward the central view screen. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, a cold reminder of the unknown dangers lurking in the darkness. "Any response from the fleet?" Hale asked. Jones shook his head. "None. Still radio silence." Carter's brow furrowed. "That doesn't make sense. They sent the distress call barely 48 hours ago. They should still be out there." "Keep scanning," Hale ordered, his voice hard. "I don't like this." As the Resolute drew closer to the coordinates, the tension on the bridge grew palpable. The exploration fleet had consisted of several large science vessels, not warships. If something had taken them out, it was a serious threat. Then, the view screen flickered, and a blurry image appeared. "Captain," Jones said, his voice uneasy, "I've got something." The screen resolved into a grainy visual of a massive debris field. Pieces of twisted metal and wrecked hulls floated lifelessly in the vacuum. Hale's stomach tightened. "Is that the exploration fleet?" Carter whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Magnify." The image zoomed in, revealing the unmistakable remnants of human vessels charred and broken, their crew likely lost to the void. "Scan for life signs," Hale ordered, though he already knew the answer. "None, sir," Jones confirmed. "No survivors." Hale exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a massacre, it was a warning. But from what? The Velix? Or something else entirely? As he stared at the wreckage, His gut told him that this was far beyond the Velex's reach. There was something eerie about the way the ships had been destroyed. It wasn't the result of conventional weapons fire. The hulls looked as though they had been disintegrated, their molecular structure warped beyond recognition. "Carter," Hale said quietly, "what's your read on those energy signatures?" She was already working at her console, her fingers moving quickly. After a moment, she looked up, her face pale. "Captain, I don't think this is Velex tech. These readings, they match something else." Hale's eyes met hers. "What do you mean?" Carter hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "These energy signatures, they're old. Older than anything we've encountered before. I've cross-referenced them with known galactic records, and the closest match comes from prehistoric data archives. The kind that haven't been accessed in millennia." Hale's pulse quickened. "Are you saying this is ancient technology?" "I think so," Carter replied, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something out here, Captain. Something that's been hidden for a very long time." Just then, the Resolute shuddered violently, alarms blaring across the bridge. "What the hell was that?" Hale shouted. Jones's hands flew across his console. "Energy surge, Captain. Something's coming fast." The view screen flickered again, and this time it showed something far worse than wreckage. A massive, looming structure appeared out of the darkness, a ship, but like nothing they had ever seen. Its design was sleek and predatory, its hull covered in strange, pulsing symbols that glowed with an otherworldly light. "Captain," Jones said, his voice trembling. "That thing, it's not reading as Velex, it's not reading as anything." Hale's blood ran cold. This wasn't a warship. It was a relic from a time long forgotten, a remnant of a civilization that had been erased from history. And it was coming for them. The ship moved with terrifying speed, cutting through the debris field like a predator stalking its prey. The Resolute's alarms screamed as the massive vessel bore down on them, its strange, glowing symbols pulsing faster with each passing second. "Evasive maneuvers," Hale barked, gripping the armrest of his chair. "Get us out of its path." Lieutenant Jones's hands flew over his console, sending the Resolute into a hard roll. The ancient ship swept past them, narrowly missing the hull by a few hundred meters. But it didn't turn to attack. Instead, it glided silently into the wreckage of the exploration fleet and came to a stop. Hale's eyes were locked on the view screen. "What's it doing?" Carter was frantically working at her station. I don't know. It's scanning the wreckage. But its energy readings are off the charts, Captain. This thing, whatever it is, shouldn't even be functioning." The strange ship hovered ominously, its presence sending a chill through the crew. Hale's instincts screamed at him to flee, but something held him back. There was something about that ship, something they needed to understand before it was too late. "Open a channel," Hale ordered. "Let's see if it's willing to talk." Carter hesitated. "Captain, we don't even know if it's—" "Just do it," Hale interrupted, his voice firm. Carter nodded, activating the comms. "Channel open." Hale took a breath. "This is Captain Hale of the United Terran Alliance vessel Resolute. We are on a rescue mission and mean you no harm. Identify yourself." For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Then, slowly, a voice crackled through the speakers. It was deep, metallic, and strangely melodic, as if 1,000 voices were speaking in unison. "We are the Veltari, the last of the ancient ones." The name sent a jolt through the bridge. Hale glanced at Carter, who was already pulling up data. The Veltari were a myth, an ancient civilization that supposedly predated most known galactic species. According to legend, they had vanished millions of years ago, wiped out by some unknown cataclysm. But now, here they were, or at least their ghost. Hale leaned forward. "The Veltari, you were thought to be extinct." "Extinct, but not forgotten," the voice replied. "We have slept for eons, waiting for the time when we would rise again. The stars have whispered of your kind, humans." There was something unsettling about the way the voice said humans, as if it was both familiar and alien at the same time. Hale forced himself to stay calm. "We don't want conflict. We're explorers, not conquerors." The voice laughed, a hollow, eerie sound that sent a shiver down Hale's spine. "Conflict is inevitable. Your kind stirs the echoes of the past. The old wars. You awaken what was meant to remain buried." Hale exchanged a glance with Carter. The Veltari weren't just ancient, they were dangerous. "What do you mean by old wars?" Hale asked carefully. There was a pause, as if the entity was considering whether to answer. "The Velex. They are but children in the shadow of what once was. We fought the true enemy, long before your kind walked the stars. And now, the enemy stirs once more." Hale's pulse quickened. "What enemy?" The voice grew darker, colder. "The ones who consumed the stars, the devourers of life itself. You call them by many names, but they are older than the galaxies. They are coming." Before Hale could respond, the ship shuddered violently again, this time with more force. The viewscreen flashed, and the ancient Veltari vessel began to move, its pulsing symbols flaring brighter. "Captain," Jones yelled, "that thing's charging some kind of energy weapon." "Shields up! Full power to engines!" Hale shouted. But before the Resolute could react, the Veltari ship unleashed a blinding burst of energy. It wasn't an attack, it was a pulse, a signal that rippled through the stars, igniting the wreckage around them with strange, ethereal light. The crew shielded their eyes as the entire debris field began to glow, as if coming alive. The ruined ships started to shift, rearranging themselves into a bizarre, incomprehensible pattern. It was as though the Veltari ship was reassembling the wreckage into something new. "What in the hell is happening?" Carter whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Hale's heart pounded in his chest. "Whatever it is, we can't stay here. Jones, get us out of this mess now." Jones didn't need to be told twice. The Resolute's engines roared to life, propelling them away from the strange, unfolding scene. But even as they escaped the immediate danger, Hale knew that they hadn't seen the last of the Veltari or their mysterious warnings. "Captain," Carter said, her voice low, "if what that AI said is true, if there's something out there older than the Velex." Hale nodded grimly. "Then we've just woken up a nightmare." The Resolute sped away from the outer rim, but the tension in the air didn't lessen. Hale sat at the head of the bridge, staring at the star map on his console. The Veltari vessel was still out there, and now they had left behind more questions than answers. Jones was the first to break the silence. "Captain, we've got a message from the Utah Command. They've received our initial report." Hale looked up. "What's their response?" Jones's face tightened. "They want us to investigate further. High priority." Hale clenched his jaw. He had expected as much, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than a simple recon mission. The Veltari's cryptic warning hung heavy in his mind. "What about the energy readings from that pulse?" Hale asked. Carter was already on it, her eyes scanning the data on her console. "It's still spreading. Whatever they did to the wreckage, it's changing. I've never seen anything like it." "Do we know if the Velex are involved?" Hale pressed. Carter hesitated. "There's no sign of Velex ships in the area, but given the scale of this, they'll know soon enough." Hale's eyes narrowed. Corrin wouldn't miss an opportunity like this. The Velex leader was still out there, and if he caught wind of ancient Veltari technology, he'd stop at nothing to claim it. "We need to move fast," Hale said, his voice firm. "If the Veltari are right, we're not just dealing with the Velex anymore. There's something much worse out there, and it's waking up." As the Resolute set course deeper into the unknown, Hale couldn't shake the sense of dread creeping into his mind. The Veltari had spoken of old wars, of enemies long forgotten, but Hale had the sinking feeling that humanity was about to become entangled in a conflict far beyond their understanding. And this time, they might not make it out alive. The Resolute streaked through the void at top speed, leaving the eerie remnants of the outer rim far behind. Inside the warship, tension simmered beneath the surface. Captain Hale sat in his ready room, a holographic map of the galaxy projected in front of him. The Veltari's cryptic warning played on a loop in his mind, and the consequences of their message were impossible to ignore. The devourers of life itself, Hale muttered under his breath. He had no idea what the Veltari meant by that, but it sent chills down his spine. The chime of the door broke his concentration. "Enter," Hale called. Lieutenant Carter stepped inside, holding a datapad. "Captain, I've finished analyzing the data from the Veltari pulse. You're going to want to see this." Hale leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What did you find?" Carter activated the holographic display, revealing a series of complex energy signatures. When the Veltari ship released that pulse, it triggered a chain reaction in the debris field. But it wasn't just a random burst of energy. This was deliberate. "Deliberate?" Hale repeated. "What do you mean?" Carter's face was grim. "It's as if the pulse reactivated something in the wreckage, some kind of ancient technology buried within the ships themselves. Whatever it is, it's not of human origin, and it's certainly not Velex. I'm not even sure our science teams will understand it." Hale's gaze hardened. "So, they weren't just destroying the wreckage, they were using it?" Carter nodded. "That's what it looks like. And here's the really strange part. The energy signatures we're detecting are growing. They're spreading across space, heading for a location deep in the galactic core." Hale felt a knot form in his stomach. The galactic core was a region of space that had remained largely unexplored due to its hazardous nature and gravitational anomalies. If something was stirring there, it wasn't good. "Do we have a destination?" Hale asked. Carter swiped through her datapad, pulling up a set of coordinates. "I've traced the energy trail to a system near the core, a dead zone that hasn't been visited in centuries. No known colonies or stations. The data suggests it's been abandoned." "Abandoned," Hale repeated. "Why?" Carter shook her head. "No one knows. It's marked on the Uda's ancient archives as a no-go zone, the kind of place where ships disappear without a trace." Hale rubbed his temples, trying to piece it all together. Ancient Veltari technology, cryptic warnings about an enemy older than the Velex, and now a dead zone in the galactic core. It all pointed to one thing: something was waking up, and it was tied to humanity's survival. "Get the crew ready," Hale ordered. "We're going in." The journey to the dead zone was tense and silent. As the Resolute neared the galactic core, the stars outside the viewport began to shift, taking on an eerie, reddish hue. The gravitational forces in the region were notorious for bending light, and the further they traveled, the more disorienting the view became. "Entering the dead zone," Jones announced from the helm, his voice tight with unease. Hale stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The space ahead of them was dark, almost unnaturally so. There were no stars, no light, just an endless black void. "Anything on scanners?" Hale asked. Carter frowned at her console. "Nothing. The entire area is a dead zone for energy readings. We're flying blind, Captain." Hale's jaw clenched. He hated the idea of walking into a trap, but they had no choice. The Veltari's pulse had pointed them here, and if they were going to stop whatever ancient enemy was waking up, this was the place to do it. "Slow to impulse," Hale ordered. "Let's take this one step at a time." The Resolute's engines quieted as the ship slowed its approach. The eerie silence on the bridge was broken only by the soft hum of the systems, and every crew member was on edge, their eyes darting from console to console. Then, out of the darkness, a massive structure began to materialize on the viewscreen. "Captain." Carter's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you seeing this?" Hale stared in stunned silence. The structure was enormous, an ancient space station that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Its design was unmistakably alien, with jagged spires and twisting, organic shapes that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Glowing lines of energy pulsed through its surface, feeding into a central hub that looked like some kind of control nexus. It's a Veltari construct, Carter breathed. But it's been dormant for millennia. Hale nodded slowly. Not anymore. As the Resolute drew closer, the scale of the station became even more apparent. It was larger than a moon, and its surface was littered with the wreckage of ancient ships, some human, some Velex, and others that were completely unrecognizable. Carter, any signs of activity? Hale asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Carter shook her head, her eyes scanning the data. Nothing. It's completely silent. Hale didn't like it. The Veltari had sent them here for a reason, but the station seemed lifeless. Still, there was something about the way it loomed in the darkness, as if waiting for the right moment to wake up. Prepare an away team, Hale said. I want to get a closer look. Carter's eyes widened. Captain, are you sure that's a good idea? We don't know what's down there. Hale nodded grimly. We don't have a choice. If there's a way to stop whatever's coming, it's in that station. A short time later, Hale stood in the shuttle bay, dressed in full EVA gear. The away team was small but skilled, consisting of Lieutenant Carter, Lieutenant Jones, and 2 Marines. They boarded the shuttle in silence, the weight of the mission hanging heavily over them. As the shuttle lifted off from the Resolute, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The dark void surrounding the ancient station felt oppressive, as if the very space around them was alive with unseen eyes. We're coming up on the station, Jones announced from the cockpit. Docking ports intact. Looks like we can enter through there. Hale nodded, his hands gripping the armrest of his seat. Take us in. The shuttle glided toward the station's docking port, its lights casting eerie shadows on the twisted metal surface. As they approached, the docking clamps engaged automatically, sealing the shuttle to the station with a dull, metallic thud. We're in, Jones said. Atmosphere's thin, but breathable. Gravity's at 0, 8G. Hale stood up, checking the seals on his helmet. Let's move. The team disembarked from the shuttle and stepped into the dark, abandoned corridors of the Veltari station. The walls were covered in strange, glowing symbols, similar to the ones they had seen on the Veltari ship, and the air was thick with the weight of history. This place gives me the creeps, one of the Marines muttered. Carter scanned the walls with her handheld device. I'm picking up faint energy signatures deeper inside. It's coming from the central hub. Hale nodded. That's our target. Stay close. They moved cautiously through the winding corridors, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The deeper they went, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. Hale's eyes flicked to the shadows, half expecting something to leap out at them. Finally, they reached the central chamber, a massive, circular room with a glowing pillar of light in the center. The energy radiating from the pillar was unlike anything they had ever seen. It pulsed with raw, ancient power, and as they approached, the air seemed to hum with its intensity. This must be the control nexus, Carter said, her voice hushed with awe. It's the heart of the station. Hale stared at the glowing pillar, his mind racing. If they could figure out how to shut this thing down, maybe they could prevent whatever disaster the Veltari had warned them about. But before he could speak, a low, rumbling voice filled the chamber. You have come far, humans, but you are too late. Hale spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing at the edge of the chamber was a figure, a tall, gaunt alien with glowing eyes and a menacing presence. The Veltari warned you, the figure said, its voice echoing through the room. But now, the darkness awakens, and it will consume you all. The figure's voice echoed through the chamber, sending a chill down the spines of Hale and his team. Standing before them was something far more ancient and malevolent than any Veltari they had encountered. Its tall, gaunt form was cloaked in darkness, its glowing eyes burning with an intensity that made Hale's instincts scream danger. Hale raised his weapon, but the figure didn't move. It merely watched them with cold, unblinking eyes. "Who are you?" Hale demanded, his voice steady despite the tension. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused by the question. "I am what you would call the end." Carter stepped forward, scanning the figure with her device. "Captain, whatever this thing is, it's radiating an energy signature I've never seen before. It's not Veltari, not Velex. It's something else." Hale tightened his grip on his weapon. "You said the Veltari warned us. Warned us about what?" The figure's glowing eyes flicked toward Carter's scanner, then back to Hale. "The Veltari were fools. They believed they could control the power of the void. But the void is not to be tamed." "The void?" Hale repeated. "What are you talking about?" The figure took a step closer, and for the first time, Hale could see the intricate symbols etched into its skin, symbols that glowed with the same eerie light as the control pillar behind them. "The Veltari discovered something long ago," it said. "A force older than your kind, older than the stars themselves. They sought to harness it, but in doing so, they awakened us." Carter's eyes widened in realization. "You're not Veltari, are you?" The figure smiled, a cold, humorless grin. "No. We are the Voidwalkers, beings from beyond the edge of your universe. The Veltari, in their arrogance, thought they could contain us. They built this station as a prison, but it was only a matter of time before we broke free." Hale felt his stomach drop. "And now you're awake." The Voidwalker nodded. "Indeed. The Veltari tried to destroy the evidence of their failure, but they could not stop what was already in motion. Their pulse was meant to deactivate this station and the others like it, but instead it signaled our return." The weight of the situation hit Hale like a freight train. The Veltari hadn't just been hiding a secret, they had been holding back an ancient, unstoppable force, and now it was loose. "We won't let you spread," Hale said, his voice hard. "We'll shut this station down, destroy it if we have to." The Voidwalker's grin widened. "You think you can stop us? You are like children playing with fire, unaware of the inferno you have unleashed." Before Hale could respond, the Voidwalker raised its hand, and the entire chamber began to tremble. The control pillar flared to life, its energy intensifying, and the walls around them cracked as if the station itself was reacting to the Voidwalker's power. "Captain," Carter shouted, her scanner going haywire. "The station's systems are activating. Whatever he's doing, it's triggering a chain reaction." Hale didn't waste a second. "Jones, get us back to the shuttle, now." Jones was already moving, leading the team back toward the entrance as the station's walls groaned and buckled. The Voidwalker remained where it stood, watching them with those glowing eyes as they fled. Hale spared one last glance at the creature, burning its image into his mind. He didn't know how, but he knew this wasn't the last time they would see it. The team sprinted through the crumbling corridors, the ground shaking beneath their feet. Sparks flew from the walls, and strange, alien symbols lit up in sequence as they passed, as if the station was coming to life after eons of dormancy. "Carter, can we shut it down remotely?" Hale shouted as they ran. Carter was frantically tapping at her datapad. "I'm trying, but the systems are locked. It's like the entire station is controlled by that thing in the central chamber. We'd need to disable the power source itself." "Which means going back," Hale muttered under his breath. That wasn't an option, not now, not with the Voidwalker in control. They burst into the docking bay just as another violent tremor rocked the station. The shuttle was still intact, its systems on standby, and Jones wasted no time getting them aboard. As the shuttle lifted off, Hale could see the full extent of the damage to the station. Massive cracks had formed along its surface, and energy was pouring out of the control pillar like a fountain of light. "We need to put some distance between us and that thing," Hale ordered, strapping himself into his seat. Jones didn't need to be told twice. The shuttle shot out of the docking bay and raced back toward the Resolute, the ancient station looming ominously behind them. "Captain," Carter said, her voice tight with urgency, "if we don't stop that station, it could trigger a catastrophic collapse of the surrounding space. We're talking about a localized black hole event." Hale's blood ran cold. "And how long do we have?" "Minutes," Carter replied. "Maybe less." Hale opened a comm channel to the Resolute. "Hale to Resolute. Prep the jump drive. We're getting out of here. The comm crackled to life as Lieutenant Grayson's voice came through. Aye, Captain. Jump drive's powering up. What's your ETA? 5 minutes, max, Hale said, glancing at Jones. You heard him. Let's make it in 2. The shuttle streaked through the void, and Hale's eyes flicked to the rear view. The station was growing smaller in the distance, but the energy spilling from it was intensifying, creating a swirling vortex of light and gravitational distortions. Then, without warning, the vortex collapsed. Brace for impact, Hale shouted. The shockwave hit them like a freight train, slamming into the shuttle and sending it spiraling. The lights flickered, and alarms blared as Jones fought to regain control. I've got it, Jones grunted, wrestling the shuttle back on course. We're still in one piece. Hale let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Get us to the Resolute, now. The shuttle docked with the Resolute moments later, and as soon as they were aboard, Hale sprinted to the bridge. The crew was already in action, the jump drive humming with power. Status? Hale barked as he entered the bridge. We're ready to jump, Grayson reported. But that station, it's destabilizing the entire sector. If we don't jump now, we might not make it. Hale didn't hesitate. Do it. Now. The Resolute's engines roared to life, and the stars outside the viewport stretched into lines of light as the ship leaped into hyperspace. For a moment, there was silence, just the hum of the ship and the steady breathing of the crew. Then, the view snapped back to normal, and they were safely in the void of space, far from the collapsing dead zone. We made it, Jones said, slumping into his chair with a sigh of relief. Hale nodded, but his mind was still racing. They had escaped the dead zone, but the Voidwalkers were awake now, and the ancient station's destruction had likely only delayed whatever was coming. Captain, Carter said quietly, what do we do now? Hale stared out at the stars, his expression grim. We warn the Utah, and we prepare for war. The Resolute soared through hyperspace, the engines running smooth, but the tension on the bridge was palpable. Hale stood at the center of the command deck, staring at the galaxy map projected before him. The dead zone, the ancient Veltari station, and the cryptic words of the Voidwalker played over and over in his mind. Warn the Utah, he muttered, his jaw clenched. It was the only logical next step, but he knew what it would mean: panic, disarray, and a galaxy teetering on the edge of chaos. Lieutenant Grayson approached, his face somber. Captain, I've prepared a full report for command. But, are we sure about this? If we tell them what we found, it could set off a chain reaction we're not ready for. Hale's eyes never left the galaxy map. We don't have a choice. Whatever the Veltari were trying to keep buried is out now. If we don't tell the Utah, we'll be caught off guard when it hits. And trust me, it's going to hit. Grayson hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Understood, sir. I'll send the transmission. As Grayson turned to relay the message, Hale's thoughts drifted back to the Voidwalker. The creature had spoken with such cold certainty, as if it already knew the outcome of the coming war, and the way it had talked about the Veltari, about their failure to control the power of the void, it gnawed at him. Carter, Hale called, breaking the silence. I want you to go over every piece of data we pulled from that station. I don't care how small or insignificant it seems. If there's anything we missed, I need to know. Carter nodded, her eyes tired but focused. I'll get right on it, Captain. Hale turned back to the viewport, watching the streaks of hyperspace fly by. They had escaped the dead zone, but this was only the beginning. The Voidwalkers were awake now, and whatever ancient enemy they represented, it was far beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Hours passed as the Resolute sped toward Utah Command, the crew working tirelessly to piece together the fragments of the mystery they had uncovered. But the more data they analyzed, the more questions arose. The Veltari's ancient prison, the strange energy readings, and the cryptic warnings from the Voidwalker all pointed to a larger, darker truth. Finally, as the Resolute approached the Utah headquarters on Earth, Hale received the call he had been waiting for. "Captain Hale," came the voice of Admiral Tovak, the grizzled veteran who oversaw Earth's military defenses. "I've read your report. It's troubling, to say the least. You're telling me there's an ancient force waking up in the galactic core, and we're at risk of being wiped out." Hale's voice was steady, but his words carried the weight of what they had uncovered. "Yes, sir. The Veltari built that station as a prison to contain something beyond their understanding. But they failed, and now it's loose. We encountered one of these entities, a Voidwalker. It's not like anything we've ever seen, Admiral. It's ancient, powerful, and it's coming." Tovak was silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "What do you propose we do?" "We need to mobilize the fleet," Hale said. "Every ship, every soldier. We need to prepare for the worst, because if the Voidwalkers are awake, they're not going to stop until they've consumed everything." There was another long pause before Tovak spoke again. "Mobilizing the fleet will take time, and we don't know how much of that we have." Hale's jaw tightened. "We don't have any time, Admiral. The Voidwalkers are out there, and they're not going to wait for us to be ready." Tovak sighed, his voice weary but resolute. "Understood. I'll begin preparations immediately. But, Captain, if what you're saying is true, we're looking at a full-scale war on a scale we've never seen before." Hale nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. And if we don't act fast, it could be our last." As the transmission ended, Hale turned to his crew. The bridge was silent, the weight of the coming conflict hanging heavy in the air. Carter approached, her face pale. "Captain, I've finished analyzing the data." Hale met her gaze, sensing the fear in her eyes. "What did you find?" Carter hesitated, then handed him her datapad. "It's worse than we thought. The Veltari didn't just build one station, they built dozens. All across the galaxy. They knew this day would come, and they tried to prepare for it. But it wasn't enough." Hale's heart sank as he scrolled through the data. The map showed the locations of other Veltari prisons, scattered across the galaxy like a web of ancient defense systems. But most of them had been destroyed, their containment fields long since broken. "The Voidwalkers are already free," Hale muttered, "and they're coming." He turned to his crew, his voice filled with a steely resolve. "We have a war to fight, and it's going to be unlike anything we've ever seen, but we'll be ready." The crew nodded, determination flickering in their eyes. They knew what was at stake now, and there was no turning back. As the Resolute docked at Utah Command, the first steps toward humanity's last stand were already being set in motion. The Voidwalkers had awakened, and the shadows of the lost war were rising once more. But this time, humanity would not face them alone.